Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Victober, one of the greatest BookTube events of them all, an event designed to celebrate the literature of the Victorian period. I love Victober. I've been reading the Victorians since the Victorian era, and I think they're just fantastic. I've gone the extra mile for today's video by making the lighting conditions every bit as dodgy and crepuscular as they were in Victorian London. This is not London fog. This is just old-fashioned fog. This is a weird, occluding day that is making lighting my videos a pain in the neck. But you don't come here for the visuals anyway. You come here for the pearls of wisdom. And I have not set a strict reading program for myself in Victober. If you watch a lot of the channels, everybody's doing Victober. And if you watch a lot of them, you'll see a lot of programs. There are prompts. There's I think a Discord group. All sorts of bells and whistles. There's a group read of Anthony Trollope's novel, The Way We Live Now. Strongly urge you to take care of that, to join in on that. Where are you ever going to find a more energetic and fun group of people to read The Way We Live Now with than now? And one thing that you will find in common with a lot of those Victober videos is people holding up signature major signpost pieces of Victorian literature. We did a starter kit about such things. Everything from the lowbrow end of Sherlock Holmes or Dracula or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all the way up to the highbrow end, the Bronte sisters or George Eliot or Anthony Trollope himself or Charles Dickens. Those are fascinating. It's always fascinating for me to see which of those major classics are going to attract which booktubers that I already watch. It's always fascinating for me to see which booktubers I already watch have not read some major Victorian classic, and it's fun to see them fill in that gap during Victober. One thing that I like to remind people during Victober, and also long before there was a Victober and long before there was an internet, is that in order to have a roster of 33 or 35 major Victorian works of literature, you have to have a whole bunch of minor Victorian works of literature, a whole bunch of them. This was a period when literature, just in general, exploded. It had a gigantic explosion that gave rise to a huge ecosystem of authors, only a tiny fraction of whom are remembered today. There was that explosion, and then you had the Edwardian era, and then you had the era of incredibly cheap pulps in America and in the UK that caused another explosion. But the Victorian era was one of those explosions, and a lot of the names that you would encounter if you look deep into the subject are names that do not survive today. They are not remembered in any way. And you don't know whether or not that's a yardstick of their quality. You have the famous dictum that's been attributed to everybody from Samuel Taylor Coleridge to me that says many books are unjustly forgotten, but no book is unjustly remembered. And like most slogans, that is designed to stop your thinking on the subject. But if you concentrate on the first part is undoubtedly true. Many books are unjustly forgotten. It stands to reason that if someone had a very busy career as a novelist, a successful career as a novelist during the Victorian era, their book's always going out from Moody's Lending Library, their book's always doing well in sales and royalties, maybe even bought the owner a big house. It stands to reason if that's true, it can't only be morons who are reading those books and liking them. It's complacent in a way that the folks involved in Victober never are. It would be very complacent to say, well, that's just the judgment of history. The reason we don't remember those authors is because they aren't any good. Doubtless, if you did examine them in the kind of detail that you only really examine something in when it is new coming out, you would find worth in them. And I guess that's a long preamble to a book that I want to talk about today. This was a very good-selling novel. This sold really well. This novel made its two authors, its main author and his co-author, a lot of money. And so did the two novels on one side of it, the two novels on the other side of it. But I'd be willing to bet you do not know this author's name. The author in question is Walter Besant, B-E-S-A-N-T, whose lifespan is almost exactly the Victorian era. He was born in 1836 and died in 1901. So, he's a pure creature of the Victorian era. He was born and raised in it, came to manhood in it, wrote and worked in it, and died in it. You can't ask for much more than that. Unfortunately, he had all of the Victorian vices, which is why he died as in his early 60s. He wasn't hit by a bus or anything, but in that time, he had a very lucrative career as a writer. And he wrote a whole bunch of things, as the Victorians tended to do. I think on some level, a lot of them realized the kind of intellectual renaissance they were living in. And it caused them to do all sorts of things. It caused them to write not only the standard program of juvenile book reviews, adult book reviews, then novels, and then in your senescence, bad poetry, but also everything else. Social tracts, political tracts, adventurous translations. And Walter Besant did a lot of that. Most of it was done in collaboration with his co-writer, Jim Rice, until James Rice died in 1882. So Besant had to sort of forge ahead on his own. By the time, I know this is all who is that to most readers, but by the time James Rice died, Walter Besant was a household name. He was known to readers. He was known to people who went into bookshops or into lending libraries. So he could very much continue writing on his own. And he did. And the book that I want to talk about today, although it really could be Walter Besant just in general, because I doubt I'm ever going to go back to him. But the book I want to talk about today is a novel that he wrote largely on his own. The Orange Girl, which was written in 1899. So well after his co-writer died. And the title is, it's a term. It's not that she's orange. It's the orange girls used to go around at public events, bear gardens, that sort of thing, and sell oranges and fruits from a tray. And they were employed by people who wanted their oranges and treats and whatnots to sell better than the ones being hawked by the girl carrying a tray 2 aisles over. So orange girls were often provocatively dressed for the time and had a sort of claim on the public imagination that doesn't really have an equivalent right now, I don't think. Once upon a time in American history, it would have been the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Now maybe the Cardassians, although even that feels outdated. In other words, the point I'm trying to make is calling your book The Orange Girl would have carried a lot of freight with your readers. They would have understood something from it that we aren't going to understand in 2023. And this is a novel about Will Halliday, young Will Halliday, who we meet, as the novel opens, we meet him in debtor's prison. Even though he is the son of a successful businessman, a very successful businessman. Young Will Halliday has, in other words, prospects. To get a job with his father's firm, to maybe inherit his father's firm, certainly to inherit a fortune. But he has an artistic temperament. He likes to play the fiddle. And that has landed him in debtor's prison. But a solution may be on the horizon. Because his father is perfectly willing to leave his entire fortune in his will. The only problem is that Will Halliday has a cousin. he has a cousin. His father's nephew, Matthew, is also mentioned in the will. His father leaves a condition in the will that whichever of those two young men, Will or Matthew, outlives the other, gets the whole fortune. I don't know anything about, I don't know the details and the byways of Victorian legal codes. In America today, you could not do that as a condition of your will. The will would be voided. That is an incitement to crime. So you could not do that in a will today. Maybe you could do it then. It's certainly a great pulpy gimmick either way, because the minute Will Halliday learns this, he knows that all sorts of forces are going to gather around him. Now, some of those forces will be at the behest of his cousin, who is a thorough turd. He is the villain of the piece. Some of those forces will be at his behest, but others won't be. The Victorian world, as you know, if you've ever read any Victorian fiction, the Victorian world swarmed around anyone who had so-called prospects. If it was known, and it became known right away, law clerks used to be bribed to disseminate the information. If it became known that you were in the way of a large fortune, all sorts of people would gather around you to bilk you or lend you money at great interest terms or whatnot. Suddenly, Will Halliday has to deal with all of that. And helping him navigate his way through that labyrinth of deception and deceit is the orange girl. It is an orange girl named Jenny Wilmot, who is beautiful and the sum of all the virtues and well-spoken and angelic, and she wants to help him. She is, in every way, a heaven-sent creature. Walter Besant very much took part in a lot of the mind frames and prejudices of his day. He also, to give him credit, fought against a lot of them, too. When I say that Victorian novelists, Walter Besant, you don't know his name, but he was a very well-selling, well-regarded Victorian novelist. In between novels, and whenever the mood struck him, and whenever an editor was willing to pay, £10, he would write sociology tracts, political tracts, things that you would think a novelist more likely in our own day would not do. He would do that. And a lot of his positions were what we would now consider to be forward-thinking. You can certainly see that in some of his fiction. You can't see it in The Orange Girl. The Orange Girl is pure Victorian schmaltz and syrup. If you've read decidedly minor Victorian fiction along those lines and liked it, and I'm not criticizing if you did, because there is certainly a way to like this stuff. Well, there's an ocean of it, and one of the boats on that ocean is Walter Besant. You should find a copy of The Orange Girl. I'm sure this is free on Project Gutenberg. I'm sure that it is. If you like that sort of thing in your Victorian fiction, well, The Orange Girl is right up your alley. Our virtuous young couple face one problem after another, almost always coming down to the bravery of young Will Halliday and also the pluck, the ingenuity, and the spiritual purity of Jenny Wilmot, of The Orange Girl. That can lead to very predictable plot twists. This is not a good novel at all. It's full of melodrama and purple writing and whatnot. But if your idea of celebrating Victober is to look at, the people who made out the bottom 90% of the bestseller list, this is the book for you. This might be the author for you. And the reason I mention his sort of moonlighting nonfiction writing is because he wrote a lot of that too, and a lot of it is interesting. I don't know how much of it is collected, but a lot of it is out there. The Orange Girl had a very pretty release as a hardcover. No idea, this is not the original cover. The original cover was very nice. It was very understated in the kind of artistic way that Victorian hardcovers often are. I have no idea if Walter Besant is collectible. He might be. He's not read anymore. He's not reprinted anymore. No one's ever going to reprint him anymore. But a few years after he wrote this book, he wrote one of those nonfiction pieces about, our life and times and whatnot. It was called As We Are and As We May Be. Those kinds of nonfiction detours by authors often had slightly moralizing titles, or not so slightly moralizing. And I want to read you a bit from that may shed light on the Orange Girl. Maybe. I mean, Walter Besant had not written this piece yet, but at the beginning of this collection of As We Are and As We May, it's a collection of occasional pieces that he wrote over years. And at the beginning of this collection, he himself mentions to the reader, and it's sort of an introduction that he made for the volume, he himself tells the reader, in the course of reading this book, you may notice certain themes recur, even though the pieces have dates on them, and were written across a large amount of time. These are the author's themes. So he was aware that the things in As We Are and As We May be found in an earlier work. He was well aware of that. And in one of the essays in this piece, he writes about the young women who were in Jenny Wilmot's position, who ended up as Orange Girls or worse. And I wanted to read you that just so that you get another side of this author's view of the young women who were some of the new women that are one of the prompts in this year's Victober. He writes, on last August bank holiday, I was on Hampstead Heath. The East Heath was crowded with a noisy, turbulent, good-tempered mob, enjoying, as a London crowd always does, the mere presence of a multitude. There was a little rough horseplay and an exchange of favorite witticisms, and there was some preaching and a great singing of irreverent parodies. There was little drunkenness and little bad behavior, except for half a dozen troops or companies of girls. They were quite young, none of them apparently over 15 or 16. They were running about together, not courting the company of the boys, but contented with their own society, and loudly talking and shouting as they ran among the swings and merry-go-rounds and other attractions of the fair. I may safely aver that language more vile and depraved, revealing knowledge and thoughts more vile and depraved, I have never heard from any grown man or woman in the worst part of town. A mere profanity, of course, these girls would be easily defeated. At mere profanity, of course, these girls would be easily defeated by men, but not in absolute vileness. The quiet working men among whom they ran looked on in amazement and disgust. They had never heard anything in all their lives to equal the abomination of these girls' language. Now, they were girls who had all, I suppose, passed the third or fourth standard. At 13, they had gone into the workshop or the street, and of all the various contrivances to influence the young, not one has yet caught hold of them. The curbstone and the pavements of the street were their schools. As for their conversation, it had in this short time developed to a vileness so amazing. What refining influence, what trace of good manners, what desire for better things, what self-restraint, respect, or government was left in the minds of these girls as a part of their education? As one of the bystanders, himself of the working class, said to me, God help their husbands. Yes, poverty has many stings, but there can be none sharper than the necessity of marrying one of these poor, neglected creatures. Okay. So I gather from that last comment that these young girls, these 15 and 16-year-olds, are poor. I guess we're supposed to infer that from their behavior. But this gives you an idea of what George Besant thought when he was walking around, what thoughts were in his head. Some of you who know your Dickens may hear a very similar note. Now they're talking about the most famous of all Victorian authors versus one of the least famous ones. Dickens also said in one of his essays about America, he said that he had never before in his life heard fouler language than he heard on the lips of a young woman in Lowell, Massachusetts. So it was a common phrase that girls these days really need to get husbands in order to get the taint of the street off them. And I don't know that you'll find that quite exactly laid out so explicitly in The Orange Girl. It's pretty clear from the beginning of this novel that Will Halliday is in many ways supposed to save Jenny Wilmot, even though she saves him all throughout the book. I think you can expect that in Victorian fiction. You get that even in Trollope. So that's your Victober excursion for today, minus an ear-piercing siren, because I cannot make a video at any time of the day or night without that happening. I hope it wasn't too distracting, but that's your Victober author for today, is Walter Besant. I thought deserved at least a tiny moment in the sun in an event that's designed to talk about the era in which he lived and wrote. If he's not going to get a moment in the sun now, when is he going to get a moment in the sun? You might try The Orange Girl. I'm sure there's a download free online. You might see if you like it. If not that, he wrote a couple of others. If you don't like The Orange Girl, a neat experiment would be to go a little bit back in time. Go to the 1880s or the 1870s and try a novel that he wrote with Jim Rice and see if maybe you like that a little better. And maybe can you tell the difference? Be a fascinating thing if you felt like doing a little experiment. But that's my Victober video for today. I will wrap this up for now. I'll be back with another Victorian worthy soon. I will see you then. Thank you.